You built a brand, you named it, designed it, launched it, but did you protect it? In this episode of Brand Cramp, I sit down with IP attorney Matt Patterson to break down the basics. What every business owner needs to know about copyrights, trademarks, name searches, and why skipping this stuff can cost you everything. Learn what counts as intellectual property, avoid the top legal mistakes most businesses make, and walk away with 3 action steps today to protect your business. Your brand is too important to lose. Let's keep it safe. Welcome to Brand Cramp. Today we're talking about IP and why it should be the number one consideration for anyone who owns a business or is involved in launching one. I'd like to welcome attorney Matt Patterson, owner of Optimal IP Strategies, to the podcast. Matt is a seasoned IP attorney who has helped me, my clients, and many others secure their IP. He also specializes in patents for emerging technology, but will save patents until a later date. Welcome, Matt.
Hey, thanks, Aileen. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you too. Let's just dive right in because this is going to be a quick little video for folks in business. What
Okay.
exactly is intellectual property and what types of things fall under IP?
So intellectual property is on the creative side of things. So it's anything that somebody comes up with that either improves a process or is an invention or a slogan or any written materials or photographs, art, that kind of stuff. Anything that embodies creativity.
Huh. I'm not sure you've ever explained it that way to me, and that makes complete sense. So creative, anything that embodies creativity. So let's talk about copyright, trademark, and patent, because I know folks ask you about this all the time.
Yep.
And even me, like I get confused between a copyright and a trademark. So let's start with what's a copyright?
Yeah, and to your point, I think it's important that people understand the differences, but they should also understand the broad category of IP. And so they may not need to know what a copyright, a trademark, or a patent is, but they should know when they have IP. And then they should understand which category it goes into. So copyrights are anything creative that gets reduced to a tangible medium, right? So if I sing an original song to you, it's not creative. I mean, it's not copyright unless we recorded it, right? Once you record it, it becomes copyrighted. And so what kinds of things? Books, instructions for a class that's at least creative enough, right? That you put creativity into. Um, um, Photographs, um, again, songs, music, art,
So
paintings,
what about
those
in
kinds
the
of things.
example you gave about a song not being copyrightable until it's recorded? What about the lyrics? You can copyright lyrics, can't you?
If you write them down, for sure.
Oh,
So,
okay.
sure. So if you write them down, save them to your hard drive, whatever, as soon as you reduce them to a tangible medium, if you just blurt out lyrics, you haven't protected them yet, right?
Okay.
I mean, they
Okay.
can be protected, but you haven't done
Yeah.
it yet. That's all.
Okay. All right. Then what about a trademark?
So trademarks signify the source of goods or services, right? So they have to be associated with a use in commerce, right? So you have to have a business purpose behind them, right? Or copyright you don't, but in trademarks, it signifies the source of the goods, right? So if you're selling a widget, right, and your widget's called, widget one, that's your trademark for you would trademark that for your widget, and it would be associated with your company providing that widget, right? And if you had services, Aileen Designs doing marketing work for people, you're providing marketing services under the brand name Aileen Designs, and that's your trademark is Aileen Designs.
And if I had products that fell underneath Alien Designs, could those also be trademarked products or
Sure,
services? So if I have, a brand audit, Alien's brand audit, could I
right.
trademark that?
Sure. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And
Okay.
and so would that be a service, an audit service, right? So and it really doesn't matter, service or goods, they're still trademarks, right? It's just that under trademarks there's classifications, right? So you're classified. The example I always give is Roadrunner, right? Acme Dynamite, Acme Screw, Acme Elevator, all of those things can exist because they're in different classifications, catering to different categories of consumers, right?
Okay. All
So,
right. Then what about a patent?
so patents protect um, inventions. So um, the most common thing is a utility patent that covers a thing, right? So you come up with the new mousetrap, right? That's the ubiquitous example. So it covers the making, using, or selling of that new mousetrap, if you will, right? Or any invention. I mean, there's different other types like methods and compositions, meaning like a chemical composition. You can protect those things through patents, right? But that's so it's inventions that are embodied in a physical state, right?
All right. And we can get into that in a whole other,
Yeah,
we could
right.
actually have like a
At,
2 hour
at least
podcast
one,
on
right?
that. Exactly. Exactly.
Right.
What are some common mistakes business owners make when it comes to their IP? And I can tell you based on my experience, first of all, business owners may not think they have IP.
Right.
So, we can start there. But what are some common mistakes?
Yeah, so I always say that people think that everything they do, so there's two kinds of people. Everything they do is important, novel, rises to the level, oh, I need to protect this. And people who say, that's not that big a deal. And those two people are typically in opposite of each other, right?
Yeah.
And so you come up with a neat name, right? And so you should, uh, the a mistake people make is not latching onto that name from a branding perspective from day one, right?
Yeah.
And so, okay, that's a great name. I should search that name, right? That's what you should do first, right? And so search, I mean, a Google search is a great place to start, right?
Yeah.
So is somebody using that name in my space where I'm contemplating using it? So that would be a good place to start.
And it's something that I always do, especially if I have a client who needs a logo. I will Google it to see what other people have that name.
Right.
And then obviously if I feel that it's in the same category, I'll talk to you first. And I'll
Right.
recommend that they talk to
Right.
you.
Right. I mean, because I have search tools where I can, look at databases that aren't Google, right?
Yeah.
But
Yep.
Google's a great place for people to start.
Yeah.
Right.
And I know, one of the things I want to talk about way early in my career, I was exploring licensing artwork. And I was dealing with a consultant who told me, as I was figuring out what the name of my company was, she said, go, if you have a million ideas, go secure the domain
Right.
first
Yep.
and you'll be protected. And I'm not sure that was valid advice.
And it's really not because I mean
Yeah.
there's really no regulating entity matching a company owner with a domain name, right?
Yeah.
I mean there are regulating entities, but they don't. That's not their job, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you can get just about any entity name you want, right? But that doesn't mean you can go ahead and use it, right? Because if you are
Yes.
now being confused with somebody who owns the trademark that's similar to that URL, right? They can stop you, basically stop you.
Right. Exactly. And these days domains, you can get a .oe.us.ed,
Right,
after everything.
right,
So you just have to be
right,
careful.
right.
Um, so one of the things that you mentioned earlier is, doing a search for your name and categories. And let's talk a little bit why, when you sort of trademark your name, why a category matters. And you and
Well,
I actually ran into this with Brand Cramp.
right.
Because originally we trademarked it as a podcast, but now that we've sort of revisited Brand Cramp and have widened its capacity to workshops and those types of things, we needed to talk about another category. So just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I mean, in general, we talk about these things as categories. The U.S. Patent and Trademark Office talks about them as classifications, right? So
Okay.
you get classified, and you gave an example of podcasts. That's one classification, and so you can register if that's the service you're providing or the product you're providing is podcast services. then that's where you want to register your name, right? And why do you want to do that? So that others can't use your Brand Cramp name in association with podcasts, because that would interfere with your business in various ways, either disparaging your name, diluting your name, confusing your name. Those kinds of things happen. But but it doesn't prevent somebody necessarily from registering Brand Cramp in a different classification that's not related to podcasts.
Right.
So if you want to branch out and now start doing other services, and you want to retain that trademark under the same umbrella, right? You're creating an umbrella with services under that umbrella. Then you want to protect it in other classifications in which you want to do business. You can't protect it everywhere, because you have to show that you're using that mark in commerce in association with those services in order to get a
Right.
trademark.
Right. But I think it's important that if you are starting a business and you have a business plan, generally in your business plan, you'll have, a 5, 10 year lookout.
Right.
And, if you find that you're going to start at one point and over time expand to other areas, that it's important to think about that, because it's
Right.
important. So before you start your business, if you're starting as a podcast and looking to expand into something else, that
Right.
you handle that at launch versus waiting. So,
Absolutely. And
yeah.
you can do both, meaning, okay, I'm going to have these other um, services that I want to offer later, right? And you can file your trademark application with what's called an intent to use, right? So I'm using it in podcast now, and within a year or whatever time frame I want to use it in educational services. You can file the application and split it between actual use as podcasts and intent to use as education later,
Huh.
right? And you get in
Yeah.
line by doing that, and nobody else can get in line in front of you.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Let's switch gears a little bit to, copywriting your original content. One of the things that you and I talked about, you're going to launch a website, you have copy that you've written, you have content that you are going to include it that can be downloaded. Sort of, let's talk a little bit about that. What's copyrightable, what is not?
So what is copyrightable is anything that rises to the level of creativity, meaning like you can't copyright the phone book, right? Because it's just a recitation of facts. But once you start to put your own spin on things, this is the procedure for branding something, or this is here's my curriculum for the next podcast where we're going to learn about this topic, right? Those things you've put creative content into, those things are copyrightable, right?
Okay.
So the minute you record them, you obtain a copyright in them in common law, okay? And you can use the C with a circle around it, right?
I was just going to ask that question. Yeah. Yeah.
You can't use in trademark law, you can't use the R with a circle around it until it's actually registered. But in
Okay.
copyright law, you can, the minute you put it down into what they call tangible medium, right? Save it, whatever, you can start using the C with a circle around it, and it shows people that you're claiming ownership of that content, right? And you can
Okay.
avail yourself of common law copyright. So that's good, except for now you have to prove damages. You have to prove that somebody took it. You have to prove that you've been harmed, right? To enforce your rights. If you go through the Copyright Office and register it, you can avail yourself. Now you have registration, right?
Oh, okay.
National registration. You get a number, right? And it's a copy is retained at the Copyright Office. And if somebody does infringe your rights, we can talk about what those rights are, but if somebody does infringe your copyrights, you can say, cease and desist, my copyright, here's the number, right?
Yeah.
People will stop. And there is a process to go through, and timing can be important, right? So you can copyright something before it's published, which is usually much easier, but then you can copyright things that are published later, right?
Okay.
I'm sorry, you can copyright things that are published after they've already been published. It's just a
Okay.
slightly different process, right? But
Right. So it's a good idea to put that little copyright
right,
little blurb on the bottom of
right,
things.
all
Yep.
rights
Okay.
reserved, and the year that it
Yep.
was created, and boom, right? And so you're putting the world on notice that you're the owner of that material, right?
Okay. All right. Neat.
Yep.
Um, so let's talk about what business owners should be doing. And, I'm going to throw some common scenarios at you and just, let me know what you think.
Okay. Okay.
So, what should a business owner be doing before they launch a new name for their business or launch a business with a name,
Yep.
revise their name or, create a logo?
So I'll start by saying what they shouldn't do,
Okay.
right? And what they shouldn't do is brag about it, right? They shouldn't throw it out there on social media or, do things that are tangential to their business using that name or logo. Um, because there's all kinds of people out there who, and you've heard stories of it where people will register for that URL. Now you just missed out on that, or will file for trademarks. They shouldn't, but they can, right? It's possible. And then that person's now closed out. So that's what they shouldn't do, is brag about it. But the first thing they should do is make sure it's available, right? There are state trademark databases they can look at. And we talked about Google searches, very, very powerful. And then the United States Patent and Trademark Office searches. It's a little bit, to really hone in on something, you have to understand the law and searching it. Like if you think your spelling is cool, but it's still a common pronunciation of a word, it's really the pronunciation, not the spelling. I use an X, they don't use an X. Well, it's still the same word, right?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so those kinds of things factor in. So you should really do your homework and do some real good searching before you launch your brand.
Before you land a name. So if someone's creating content, for example, courses, blog posts, things that can be downloaded,
Mhm.
what's the smartest way to protect that work?
So we talked about the C with a circle around it. So on anything you publish, put a footer, right, that has the C with the circle around it. Content, protected, all rights reserved, and the name of the company that's asserting those rights. Um, but if you plan on putting together course curriculum, those kinds of things that you want to retain ownership and value in, copyright them, right? And so there's
Copyright
a
them.
whole
Okay.
separate copyright office. It's separate from the Patent Trademark Office that you file a copyright application on. Um, and so I do that kind of work. I also teach people who, do a lot of content, right, to do their own. Like photographers, for instance, you can do 750 images
Wow.
in a single registration, right? So, and a single registration is like $60, the fee, right? And so if you have a whole bunch of images, right, you're going to an art show or you're going to a contest or whatever it is, right? Or you're putting your original images up on your website and you don't want anybody taking them, right? You can do 750 images, right?
Wow. So in that example, if you're putting your pictures up on your website, do you have to have the copyright mark on those pictures to have them protected? Or
No,
just by virtue of copywriting them, they're protected?
just by virtue of copywriting them,
Okay,
they're
that's good to
protected.
know.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and there are laws, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, that protect digital images from people, you know, copying them, changing them, and using them. Right?
Yeah.
You know, there's penalties that that can be assessed against people who do that. Right? And to
Okay.
have a copyright on top of that is much,
Yeah.
it's just an added layer of protection.
Yep. Yep. All right. So what if you've been in business for a while and you haven't done any of these things?
Yeah. Yeah.
What can you do?
So you can copyright at any time, right? So I mean, there's different laws that are associated with patents, and like you said, we'll get into that. But trademarks, you can trademark them at any time, right? And so one of the examples I always give is this one business had these cute little logos for 30 years. right? And they never trademarked them. And it wasn't franchised. It was multiple locations owned by the same business, and they copyrighted them in the end. When I say the end, they were looking to sell, exit, and they sold their business for $90 million, and the trademarks accounted for $7 million of it.
Well, we didn't even touch on that aspect of intellectual property, that there's a monetary value
Sure.
associated with it. I didn't even think about that, but yep.
It's
Okay,
called,
keep going.
yeah, it does. So trademarks especially, right, and patents, but trademarks especially over copyrights are treated as intangible assets on your balance sheet, right? So they can carry a value on your balance sheet, right, as an intangible asset, right? Goodwill, however you want to categorize it, that then, does retain capture value when you go to sell your business.
Right. And that's sort of a good segue into sort of our next section, the cautionary tales. Can you give a couple of examples of clients that you've had, or stories not stories, but situations where folks haven't protected their IP, and you know, what happened down the line?
Yes, the first one I want to talk about, goes back to when I was talking about bragging on social media. Guy contacts me, I have this great idea. And I went and I looked and the URL was gone. Somebody applied for the trademark. And I'm like, what did you do? And he's like, well, I just mentioned it on my Facebook page. Well, somebody came along and took all that stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And as far as trademarks go, they shouldn't have been able to. But who, as a startup, has the ability to then, spend tens of thousands of dollars to fight that guy who shouldn't
Yeah.
have, right? So that's the cautionary tale that goes back to our don't brag about it
Yeah.
lesson, right? But the one that really sticks out in my mind is this woman who had a great concept of doing marketing and branding meetings for people, right? And it contained the word boss, right? And the name of her seminars was Boss Camp, right? So she's out there doing her thing, and Hugo Boss sends her a cease and desist letter, right? And she could fight it if she wanted to, right? Because what does Hugo Boss have to do with, marketing and branding seminars, right?
Yeah.
But who, again, as a startup, has that kind of money to fight it, right? And so,
Yeah.
had she done her research ahead of time and filed for a trademark, she would have found that out before she went down the whole branding mode and then
Right.
had to pivot later. And in that particular case, Hugo Boss, and there are a lot of companies out there like this that are very, very aggressive in protecting their marks, where they go after everybody. So Hugo Boss went after everybody who used either Hugo or Boss and anything
Wow.
tangential to their businesses. And when I looked it up at the time, there were 35 defendants
Wow.
in their lawsuit against other trademark infringers.
Wow.
So that's what I would call very aggressive, but
So I
that's
guess,
much.
the lesson to be learned there is, although you may feel you're small
Yeah,
and you operate in a circle that is small,
right.
once you're online and doing your thing and out there, your world becomes very big.
Right. You're just as big as everybody
Yeah.
else.
And
Right.
honestly, you go into business thinking that you are going to become something. So,
Right.
it's better before you start to protect yourself, because when you do become big, that's when you identify issues. And one thing that sticks in my mind is, I know when Tesla, when it was taken over by Elon Musk, he didn't own the rights to the word Tesla in the category, and he had to pay big monies to
Right.
get it. Big
Big money.
money to get it.
Right.
So,
Right.
it happens, and to
Right.
know this stuff in advance is very important,
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you protected your brand? Right.
Yeah.
And so, somebody once told me that, business is a full contact sport, right?
Oh, right.
The amount of contact you can avoid,
Yeah.
right, is
Yeah.
invaluable,
Yeah,
right? You can
absolutely.
only take so many
Absolutely.
hits, right?
Yeah. So what happens if you do get a cease and desist? What do you do?
So most times, if you're a small business, right, you pivot, you rebrand, right? And
Okay.
so, and chalk it up as a lesson learned. If you didn't listen to this podcast, a lesson learned, about,
Right.
do your homework first. You can also try to appeal to the person sending the cease and desist letter, and try to come up with some kind of a settlement. You're going to pay, but, look, you're not in this space, right? And so we'll go out of our way in our advertising to say we're not in your space and we'll stay in our space, and, here's our settlement, right? And so that's possible, but you're going to pay, right?
Wow. Okay.
And that money
Okay.
is usually better spent on, R&D,
Marketing.
marketing, other things that are going to get,
Yeah.
where you're going to gain some business versus,
Right.
paying a settlement or I mean, it's expensive to
It is
pivot.
expensive.
Companies
Yeah.
know, the people that are listening know how much money they're going to put behind their brand, right? And
Yes. And
do that
even and
twice,
right. And even small business owners should think about that. Because there is a cost associated with that, and that's why it's important to think first, because even at a small business level, you want to design a logo and you work with a professional designer, you're going to be paying up to $5,000 for that,
right?
for the logo and for the brand. You're
Right,
going to build a website, you're going to be paying a website developer at least, $7,000 to $10,000 to do the
right,
first couple of pages.
right, right,
um who knows, you might want to do some advertising. The point entry there is 1,500. Before you know it, it really adds up.
right,
And this is all before you launch. This is
right,
all business that happens on the back end.
right,
So,
right.
it's really important to think about that, because you don't want to do it again.
Right, don't double your cost, right?
Right.
And to your point though, somebody comes to you for a logo. People will know when they start a business, their inbox will be flooded by people saying, "Hey, you need a logo,"
Yeah.
right? Fly by night people, he's only going to charge me $200 for that logo. That's great. Well, I just negotiated a settlement for a guy who responded to one of those ads, got a logo, and all the logo company did was change the color of another company's logo in the same business. And they got a cease and desist letter, and they've
Right.
been using it for like a year and a half. They had to rebrand and that. Yeah, so a cheap logo isn't always the best way to go.
Correct. Correct.
So
And
do your homework.
right. And I think, yeah, another plug for working with a professional graphic designer.
Right, right,
And it's hard to weed that out, but that's, something we're going to cover in one of the workshops at Brand Cramp, is sort of how to outsource and ask the right questions when you're going to be working with someone outside of your business.
right,
I think it's important, and I think, especially because you and I are friends, that whenever I do have a new client asking for a logo or to develop things on a grand scale, I always check with you first, and then we'll refer you to them. And the amazing thing is, sometimes they say, no, we don't need it.
right, right,
And then
right,
I feel like, wow, you're going to be paying me to do a logo that you may need to pay me to do again,
right,
you know?
right,
So, yeah.
right. And
Yep.
that's if everything goes on the cheap end of things.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
If you have a bunch of product out there or a bunch of product, work in process or whatever it is that's already branded, right? Do you want to scrap all that?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly. I
Right?
know. And not to mention, like, the heartache associated with it all, because, you know, to start a business and to run a business, it's a lot of freaking work.
Right?
It's a lot of work. And,
Right?
you start a business because you have something that you're really good at, and you have to do everything.
Right? Right?
And that's the biggest thing. Here I am, a marketing person and a design person. I can't market for myself. It's very hard for me to design by myself, and as a business owner, you can't wear all hats. So, you need to rely on people, and you need to find the path of doing things correctly so that you don't have to do it all over again, because that's exhausting.
Right? Right? Like if you told somebody it's going to be $100, but you know, it's really only $50. Well, how come it's not 50? Well, because you're going to do it twice, right?
Right, exactly.
You want a 50%
So,
discount? Do it the right way, right?
yeah, exactly. And sometimes, and that whole thing, you pay for what you get, or you get what you pay
Get what
for.
you pay for. Yeah.
Oh my God, that is 1,000% true.
Yeah.
I,
Yep.
as per my experience, it's 1,000% true. So anyway,
Right. Right.
so can you provide three things any business owner can do this week to tighten up their brand protection?
So first thing to do is an inventory, right?
Oh,
What do you have from a branding perspective? Names, logos, slogans, artwork that you think are valuable to your business. Do that inventory first, right? Um, you know, instruction manuals, all, anything like that, right? Depending on what kind of business you're in. Do the inventory. And then what have you done to protect those things, right? And as part of that, do a risk assessment. What if it went away? What if that particular piece that you inventoried went away? How would that affect your business? And if it would adversely affect your business, do something to protect it.
right, right.
So I'd say those are the three things, right? So do your inventory, do your assessment, and then act on your assessment.
I'm writing these down
Okay.
because I think that's great advice. I see a little graphic coming that is going to help. That's
Well,
fantastic.
I think it's easy
Yeah.
to say, I have all these branding things, right? But have you
Yeah.
actually taken an inventory? Like, what do you
Right.
have, right? So,
Right. Exactly.
Coca-Cola company has Coca-Cola, but it also has Sprite. And under Sprite, it has the refreshing lime drink or whatever it is, right? So
Yes.
that's three levels of branding associate. And then the look and feel of the can. There's, there's lots of things that go into it. But, if you
Sure.
just do your inventory on your products or services, I think you'd be surprised at how many things actually go into um, your product or service.
Yeah, and I think once you lay it out like that, you begin to see the scope of what you do and the value of what you
Right,
do.
right.
And not for nothing, it's going to make you feel better. So, if any of our listeners have questions about this, how can they get in touch with you?
So yeah, I would welcome meetings. On my website, so it's Optimal IP Strategies, and there's a branding lesson in that. Don't make your name so big, right? But it's optimal, right? Because you want to optimize things. Optimal IP as an intellectual property, strategies as in what you want to do, apply strategies to optimize your IP. OptimalIPstrategies.com is my website, and my email is Matt with two T's at OptimalIPstrategies.com.
All right. And so, just to recap, what we learned today is your brand's too important to get tangled in legal drama.
Right,
Protect it now and save yourself a branding headache down the road. So, stay smart, stay original, and we'll catch you next time on Brand Crap.
right.
Cramp.
And cramp.
Yep.
Right.
Right, exactly. Thank you, Matt. Till
Okay.
next time.
All right, Aileen, thanks.
That's good. If I say brand crap one more time,
Brand crap. It's
brand crap.
actually, I don't think people will catch that you said crap.
I can edit it.
Okay.
it. So it'll sound like brand current.
Okay. It doesn't really sound like crap.
But it's so funny. I was doing a TikTok video, like I was doing a voiceover, and I was just stuck in the brand crap mode. And I'm like, brand crap. No, Aileen, it's brand crap. Brand crap.
And it's yours.
And it's mine. I know. I need to have a I'm gonna say it with an accent. Brand cramp. Brand cramp.
A friend of mine always does it when she stumbles on words. She does the actor's warm-up thing, 20 tiny dwarfs took turns doing handstands on the carpet.
I'm not gonna lie, I was dancing around and singing before you and I got on Zoom because I'm like, I gotta untongue twist my whatever. I had to get
Yeah, right.